Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The storm of betrayal that rocked the Abbott, Chancellor, and Ashby families exploded into an inferno when Jill Abbott and Billy Abbott uncovered the shocking truth that Colin Atkinson's will had been stolen, manipulated, and rewritten, with none other than Cain Ashby at the center of the deception, exposed as the forger whose actions not only ripped through the family's fragile ties but also reignited old wounds, reopened festering scars, and sent shockwaves through Genoa City in ways no one could have foreseen, because when Jill first sat down in the Chancellor Mansion's study to review the latest legal documents pertaining to Colin's overseas estate, she never expected to see glaring inconsistencies, names misplaced, signatures that appeared too perfect, and language that bore none of Colin's reckless charm but instead the clinical precision of a practiced hand. And while Jill tried to convince herself that grief and paranoia might be clouding her judgment, her son Billy stormed into the room holding his own copy of the supposed will and slammed it onto the desk with the fury of a man who had already pieced together the treachery, declaring with fire in his eyes that Cain had manipulated everything, not just for money but for power, for validation, for revenge against a family that had always looked down on him. And as Jill's heart raced with the sting of betrayal, her mind darted back to every moment Cain had wormed his way into Catherine Chancellor's world, every time he had insisted on being more than just an outsider, every pleading look he had given Lily, every desperate attempt to rewrite his story and be seen as a legitimate heir, until the crushing weight of realization left her breathless. This wasn't just about money. It was about Cain's insatiable hunger to finally rise above the shadows of Colin's disgraceful legacy, yet in doing so he had inherited Colin's very sins, crossing the ultimate line by forging a legal document. And while Billy cursed under his breath about how Cain had dared to conspire under their noses, Jill's fury swelled into a tidal wave, tears of rage burning her eyes as she vowed that Cain would not destroy Catherine's legacy, Chancellor Industries, or the fragile thread of family they had fought to preserve. And from there the war ignited, because word spread quickly through Genoa City's tight-knit circles, whispers of Cain's crime reaching Lily's ears as she wrestled with disbelief that the man she once loved and trusted with her children could stoop to the level of a common con artist. And Devon, already burdened by his own history of inheritance battles, seethed with the memory of losing his rightful fortune to scams and manipulations, unable to believe that Cain, a man who had once stood beside him, had now become the enemy. While Billy's wrath sharpened with every passing second, his voice booming across the Chancellor estate as he demanded accountability, reminding Jill and anyone who would listen that Cain had played this family for fools far too many times, first with his lies about being Jill's son, then with his repeated betrayals of Lily, and now with this, the ultimate fraud that desecrated Colin's deathbed and mocked Catherine's memory. And as the tension escalated, Cain tried to defend himself, stumbling through half-truths and excuses, claiming that he had only wanted to secure stability for his children, that Colin's will had been vague and confusing, that he hadn't meant to hurt anyone. But the words rang hollow, and Jill, who had once extended Cain a chance at redemption, now saw only Colin's reflection staring back at her, the same manipulative grin, the same self-serving desperation, and she lashed out with a venomous fury, declaring that Cain had not only lost her trust forever but had also severed the last shred of respect she had ever harbored for him. While Billy leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous as he warned Cain that this was no longer a matter of family disappointment but of legal consequences, because forgery wasn't just betrayal, it was a crime. And as reality set in, the weight of the scandal began suffocating Cain from every direction: the walls of Chancellor, the judgmental stares of Genoa City residents, the icy silence from Lily, the disgust radiating from Devon, the relentless fury of Billy, and the bone-deep disappointment of Jill, who had tried for years to believe that Cain could overcome his darker instincts, only to be proven wrong in the most humiliating way. And from that point on, the unraveling began, with Jill marching to the authorities to ensure Cain faced justice, Billy pressing Michael Baldwin to pursue charges with the full weight of the law, and the Chancellor legacy once again dragged into the public spotlight, this time not because of Catherine's brilliance or Jill's ambition but because of Cain's deceit. And though Cain begged, pleaded, and wept for forgiveness, insisting that his heart had been in the right place even if his methods were flawed, the truth could not be erased. because the ink on the forged will told its own damning story, and the fallout would leave permanent scars, fracturing relationships beyond repair, sending Cain into a spiral of isolation, and cementing Jill and Billy's fury as the unshakable force that would drive him out of Genoa City, his name forever etched in disgrace, his legacy not as a redeemed man but as a forger who stole from the very family he once claimed to love, a man whose choices mirrored the father he despised, proving that in the end, Cain could not escape Colin's shadow but instead became it, and the storm that followed would ripple for years, reshaping alliances, destroying trust, and rewriting the Chancellor Abbott legacy in a blaze of fury, betrayal, and devastating truth. The revelation of Cain's deception reverberated far beyond the walls of the Chancellor estate, dragging every member of the family and every person connected to Catherine's legacy into the scandal, and while Jill tried to keep her composure in public, behind closed doors she was a woman on fire. Pacing the living room with a glass of scotch in hand as she replayed every moment she had ever vouched for Cain, every second she had defended him when others accused him of being just like Colin, and now those memories stung her like shards of glass, because she had been the fool who believed in him, the fool who thought he was different, the fool who allowed him near Catherine's legacy at all, and Billy, watching his mother unravel, felt his own anger sharpen into something even darker. Because this wasn't just about Cain's betrayal of Jill or Chancellor, it was about Cain's betrayal of family itself, and Billy, for all his flaws and sins, held an unshakable loyalty to those he considered his own, so to see Cain trample on the family's most sacred ground, the memory of Catherine, was enough to ignite a vendetta that Billy vowed he would never let go of until Cain was utterly destroyed. But Cain, backed into a corner, refused to go down quietly, and while Jill and Billy painted him as the villain, he began spinning his own narrative, desperate to salvage whatever dignity he could muster. He told anyone who would listen that Colin had left behind a web of confusion, debts, and half-baked promises, that the so-called real will had been written in haste, that he had merely tried to bring order to the chaos, and that if his methods were less than perfect, it was only because he was trying to protect Lily and their children from the financial ruin Colin had secretly orchestrated, and while some people in Genoa City wanted to believe him, others scoffed at the excuses, pointing out that Cain had a long history of half-truths and convenient omissions, from his lies about his parentage to his repeated betrayals of Lily's trust. And soon his pleas began to sound less like a defense and more like the desperate ramblings of a man who knew the walls were closing in. Lily, caught in the middle of this storm, found herself once again forced to confront the painful truth about Cain, the man she had once loved so deeply, the father of her children, the person she had defended time and time again, was incapable of real change, incapable of breaking free from the toxic shadow of Colin Atkinson. And though a part of her still wanted to shield Cain for the sake of Maddie and Charlie, another part of her had grown hardened, weary, and utterly done with the endless cycle of betrayal, and when she sat across from him in the park one chilly evening, she looked into his pleading eyes and told him in no uncertain terms that whatever bond they once had was over, that she could not and would not forgive him for dragging her family's name into disgrace yet again, and the finality in her voice left Cain gutted, tears burning his eyes as Lily walked away for the last time, leaving him to face the storm alone. Meanwhile, Devon, who had inherited not just Catherine's wealth but also her instincts for justice, began quietly pulling strings behind the scenes, meeting with Michael Baldwin and Christine Williams to discuss the legal ramifications of Cain's forgery, because Devon knew that money wasn't the issue. His grandmother's fortune had already been redistributed a dozen times over through will challenges and trust disputes. No. What mattered to Devon was justice, what mattered was protecting Catherine's memory from being sullied by another scandal, and when Michael laid out the charges Cain could be facing, fraud, forgery, misrepresentation, Devon felt a grim satisfaction wash over him, because for once Cain would not be able to charm or manipulate his way out of trouble, for once he would be held accountable in a court of law, and when word of the impending legal battle reached Cain, his bravado crumbled, his hands shook, and he realized that this was no longer just about Jill's fury or Billy's vendetta. This was about the possibility of losing everything, his freedom, his reputation, his family, and his future. As the drama built toward a courtroom showdown, Jill prepared herself for battle with the same ruthless determination she had once wielded in business, and though the betrayal had cut her deeply, Jill refused to let Cain's lies define Catherine's legacy, so she took control of the narrative, rallying the press, granting interviews where she lambasted Cain as a fraud and a thief, and even visiting Chancellor's board of directors to assure them that the company's name and reputation would remain untarnished under her leadership. But behind her polished public facade, Jill's anger was volcanic, and Billy, standing at her side, fueled the fire with every harsh word he spoke, every reminder of Cain's past sins, every warning that Cain could not be allowed to slither out of this the way Colin once had, and together Jill and Billy formed an unbreakable front, determined to ensure Cain's destruction. But Cain wasn't without allies, at least not at first. Tracy Abbott, ever the peacemaker, reached out to him with a sympathetic ear, reminding Jill and Billy that people could make mistakes under duress, that Catherine had always believed in redemption, that perhaps Cain had simply panicked and made a terrible choice, but her pleas for compassion fell on deaf ears, Jill snapping that Tracy had no right to lecture her about forgiveness when her family's legacy was the one being dragged through the mud, and Billy practically shouting that Cain had crossed too many lines to ever be welcomed back into the fold. Even Neil's memory seemed to hang over the situation like a ghost, with Lily remembering how her father had once tried to guide Cain onto a better path, only for Cain to veer off into darkness yet again, and Devon wondering what Neil would say now if he saw how far Cain had fallen. The trial itself became one of the most sensational events in Genoa City's recent history, with reporters lining the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, and whispers echoing through every coffee shop and office lobby about whether Cain would walk free or end up behind bars. Michael Baldwin, representing the state's case, laid out the evidence with ruthless clarity, the inconsistencies in Colin's supposed will, the handwriting analysis that proved Cain had altered the signatures, the testimony of experts who confirmed that the language of the will bore none of Colin's usual flair, and as the damning evidence piled up, Cain's defense grew weaker and weaker, his lawyer struggling to paint him as a man who had simply made a mistake rather than a calculating fraud. Jill and Billy sat in the front row of the courtroom, their eyes fixed on Cain with a mixture of disgust and vindication, and when Jill was called to the stand, her testimony was nothing short of devastating. She spoke of Catherine's legacy, of her own shame at having believed in Cain, of the pain of discovering that once again Colin's poisonous influence had infected her family, and her words struck deep, painting Cain not just as a criminal but as a man who had betrayed the very people who had once welcomed him in, and when Billy took the stand, his fury boiled over, his voice shaking with emotion as he accused Cain of being nothing more than Colin's puppet, a man who would never rise above the sins of his father, and though the judge warned him to rein in his emotions, the damage was already done, Cain's reputation lay in tatters. As the verdict loomed, Cain sat alone at the defendant's table, his face pale, his hands trembling, his mind racing with regret and desperation. He thought of Lily, of Maddie and Charlie, of the life he had thrown away for the sake of pride and greed, and though he tried to tell himself that he had only ever wanted to protect his family, the truth gnawed at him. He had wanted more, he had wanted power, he had wanted validation, and now he was paying the ultimate price. When the judge finally read the verdict, guilty of forgery and fraud, the courtroom erupted, Jill and Billy exchanging grim nods of satisfaction while Cain collapsed into his chair, the weight of his downfall crashing over him like a tidal wave, and though his lawyer promised an appeal, everyone in Genoa City knew the truth. Cain Ashby's legacy was finished, his name forever stained, his future forever uncertain. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Lily struggled to comfort her children, who were torn between love for their father and shame at his actions. Devon took solace in knowing that justice had been served but remained haunted by the pain it had caused his sister. Jill threw herself back into business, determined to protect Chancellor from any further scandal, while Billy, though satisfied, remained restless, his rage at Cain slowly giving way to a deeper unease about how betrayal seemed to follow the Abbott family like a curse. And Cain, now a pariah in Genoa City, faced the bleakest chapter of his life, estranged from his family, stripped of his dignity, and forever branded as the man who stole Colin's will, the man who tried to rewrite history through lies and forgery, the man who became the very thing he swore he would never be, his father's son. Cain Ashby's fall from grace was not a quiet one, it was a spectacle, a collapse so public and humiliating that it seemed almost theatrical, as if fate had finally decided to strip away the last of his illusions and force him to confront the truth of who he really was. The guilty verdict rang in his ears for days, echoing with a finality that he could not escape, and when he was escorted from the courthouse in handcuffs, the flashing cameras and shouted questions from reporters felt like knives stabbing into his pride. Once, Cain had walked Genoa city with his head held high, respected, if not entirely trusted, by the powerful families who ran the town. Now he was reduced to nothing more than a headline: Cain Ashby exposed as forger, sentenced for fraud. The Chancellor Mansion, once a place where Cain had laughed with Lily, shared family dinners, and fought for acceptance, became forbidden ground. Jill ordered the staff to ensure Cain was never allowed entry again, her fury still blazing hot. Billy, while not as vocal after the trial, kept a vigilant watch, reminding Jill that men like Cain always found ways to weasel back in, and that they had to remain on guard. For Jill, the betrayal was more personal than she let on to anyone, even Billy. Late at night, she would retreat to Catherine's portrait, standing before it with tears welling in her eyes, whispering apologies to her old friend for ever allowing Cain near their legacy. Catherine had been generous, too generous perhaps, and Jill felt the weight of guilt pressing on her chest. If she had been stronger, more suspicious, perhaps this humiliation could have been avoided. Billy, meanwhile, carried his rage like a second skin. He had always despised Cain's attempts to pass himself off as honorable, resented the way Cain had wedged himself into Catherine's legacy and Lily's life. To Billy, Cain had always been an opportunist, and now, exposed as a criminal, Billy felt a grim vindication. Yet beneath that anger lurked something else, an unease, a gnawing thought he couldn't shake. Was he, Billy Abbott, truly so different? Hadn't he forged his own path through lies, gambling away fortunes, betraying those he loved? Was Cain's disgrace a mirror reflecting his own sins? Billy tried to drown those thoughts in whiskey and distractions, but they haunted him nonetheless, leaving him restless even as he celebrated Cain's ruin. Lily, however, bore the heaviest burden of all. The trial had been agony, forcing her to listen to every detail of Cain's deception, every lie exposed under the harsh light of truth. She wanted to hate him, wanted to sever the bond once and for all, but love was a stubborn thing, and even in the face of betrayal, she could not erase the years they had shared, the children they had raised together, the moments of joy that now felt tainted. Maddie and Charlie were devastated, struggling to reconcile the image of their father as a loving protector with the reality of him as a forger and criminal. Lily tried to shield them, reminding them that love for a parent didn't vanish overnight, but she also refused to lie to them. Cain had done wrong, unforgivably so, and they had to face the truth. At night, alone in her apartment, Lily wept for what had been lost, for the dream of a family that could never be reclaimed, for the man she had once believed in who had now been revealed as a fraud. Devon remained stoic, outwardly composed, but inside he was seething. He had lost too much to deceit in his life, the fortune stolen, the will contests, the betrayals, and now Cain had added yet another wound to that list. Devon threw himself into his work, using Hamilton Winters to fund charities and causes that Catherine would have championed, determined to honor her legacy in a way Cain never could. Yet even Devon, hardened though he was, felt a flicker of pity when he saw Cain's hollowed expression in the courtroom, the defeated slump of his shoulders. But pity was not forgiveness, and Devon resolved never to let Cain near his family again. Cain's days following the verdict blurred into a haze of shame and desperation. While his sentence was not lengthy, thanks to good lawyers and the fact that he had no prior criminal record, it was enough to strip him of what little pride remained. Community service, restitution, probation, on paper, his punishment seemed lenient compared to the magnitude of his crime. But in reality, the true punishment was the exile. He was ostracized from Genoa city society, cut off from Lily and his children, shunned by those who had once tolerated him. Chancellor was close to him forever. The Abbotts turned their backs. Even friends like Tracy, who had once championed his better nature, could no longer defend him. Cain became a ghost in the town he once called home.